Okay, so today we have Karan Singh and Pete Navarra from SearchStax, both on the solutions team, and we will be discussing the basic concepts of data ingest from the SearchStax perspective. So let me just start with asking, kind of the highest level question, which is, can you just walk us through when data ingest is important for SearchStax customers? Is this just for Studio? Do we ever have to worry about it outside of Studio? And contextually, the reason this question I think is important is more to just make sure that for anyone who's new to SearchStax, we're just kind of, basically giving them that foundational kind of context. So maybe we can start with you, Pete, and then follow up with Karan.
Yeah, I mean, without data ingestion, we wouldn't have search results because there'd be nothing in the index. So it is extremely important to be able to have a process where we can get data into the index. And we call it data ingestion. Some people call it updating the APIs slash update, so it can go by a various number of names. But at the end of the day, it really is the process for how we get information into the index that allows us to then query against it. And is it just for Studio? I think Studio relies on Solr, and when we're talking about getting Studio search results into Solr, we're talking about data ingestion. And so is it just for Studio? No, I think and Karan has done a lot of work in this area where we have to ingest directly into Solr. And so I think it's a viable conversation for both our products, Cloud and Studio.
Yeah. And exactly. So, building just off of Pete's point, you won't have any data you won't have any search results if you don't ingest data, and that's because Solr is an index, and you need data to create an index. And that's why data becomes so important, because better data you have, more data you will have more control over the quality of search results. You'll have more control over which fields should be used for searching. You'll have more control over the facets or the sorting options. So all the quality of data will impact directly the quality of search results you get.
That makes a ton of sense. And let me maybe ask a tangential question to that, which is when people are new to search, from kind of maybe they've been, working on projects that are, touching search, but they're not doing it directly themselves. And when they're new, are there sort of any, kind of general kind of recommendations or just any kind of guiding principles that you give people in general when it comes to data ingest and how to think about that from a search standpoint? Because again, as you mentioned, yeah, it's important to get right, obviously.
Yeah. So my first advice is just make sure that you can surface up all the data that you are using. Because a customer might have some data in one repository, some data in some other repository, some metadata sitting in some third repository. Now, that's the first thing you need to make sure, that you can surface up all these different data points so that can be ingested into Studio, and then you can provide a search on top of it. So that's the first thing. Just make sure that you can send data to us.
Right. Anything to add to that, Pete?
I mean, yeah, sometimes even the first step is understanding what data you're going to send and going through the process. I mean, when we talk about, data, we're really talking about fields. When we talk about fields, we're talking about content. And, kind of taking that up a level, a lot of our customers are running these large content management systems where all they focus on is content, and that content does have fields baked into it. And so sometimes, the ability for us to get content is going to be a scrape. Sometimes it's going to be a selection of fields from the back end of the CMS. And so, taking the time to understand your content and understand what portions of your page, what portions of your field matter most before you really get into the process of doing your ingestion is going to make doing your ingestion much easier.
Yeah, so we touched on two things there. One is the sort of mechanism being able to actually send data. The other one is the data, sources themselves, and even the fields, specifically, kind of mapping it to the fields. And maybe a question I have related to that then is going back to what you said, Karan, like what do I need to have figured out beforehand in order to know that I can send data? So what are some things that are important for me to think about, at the brass tacks level?
So the first thing that you need to make sure when figuring out whether the data can be sent is making sure that you can connect to our system. That's like the first thing. You can, whatever system you're using, that system can connect to us using our APIs. So once you figure that out, once that connection is there, then you can start looking into the data itself. Then you can start looking into fields. You can start looking into how should you populate those fields, and then how often should you push data to Studio or SearchStax Cloud, whatever product you're pushing the data to. So first you check if you can connect to us, then you check if you have sorted out all the fields that you need to send to us, and then you just send data to us.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, awesome. And what else do we need to have figured out beforehand? We touched on a couple of things there. And maybe what I'll ask in a minute is just maybe can we get an overview of Studio itself? But what are some of the other things that I really have to have figured out at the data ingest level, prior? Is there anything that's not specifically related to these areas that we've already discussed, but are just as critical in making sure that, like, maybe there's process internally, ownership of the data, a lot of those kinds of things? Can you give a little bit more detail about some of that? Maybe we'll start with you, Pete, on this one.
Yeah, I mean in terms of what you need beforehand, as I kind of said, it's really just an understanding of where your content lives, what your content is, the mechanisms, right? So most of our content is going to get ingested via a crawler. So what are we going to be crawling? Are we going to be crawling just your homepage? Are we going to be crawling your site XML? I would say there's some homework ahead of time that is going to be helpful for us to understand where the data is coming from. And once we know where the data is coming from, then it's which data. And like, for instance, something that Karan sees this almost on a daily basis now. It's like when we're crawling a site, do we want the meta tags, and which meta fields from the header are we looking at? Do you want your H1 tag to stand out as a different field? Do you want to crawl your navigation? Like, I don't think the answer is going to be yes on that, but when you think about the different parts of any particular page on your website, having an understanding of what parts you really want to index is going to be helpful. Because if you do that process when we're trying to onboard you, as an example, that can become a very lengthy onboarding, because now it's like, we're having to spend some time waiting for the client to go through and actually do that assessment. So kind of having an understanding ahead of time of, hey, I know we're going to be doing some new search result things, and it's really going to be based on content from our site. Well, let's make a list of what content, what template types, what page types, what URL structures. Are we going just off your sitemap XML? And is your sitemap XML up to date? Is your robots.txt up to date? So is what content? Actually, when we're thinking about crawlers, that's even more important sometimes. Is what do you not want us to index? And the robots.txt helps a lot there. And it kind of got a little technical there, but really, that's for me, especially as somebody who helps kind of funnel customers on this journey of onboarding Studio. Understanding where the content comes from is really the first step when we think about what they need to have figured out beforehand.
Okay, that's really helpful. And you mentioned kind of the customers, and then Karan sees this every day. So maybe, Karan, can we take it to you and just provide, if you could just provide like a couple examples of projects recently or even in the past, where more distant past, where you had to do a lot of kind of this type of maybe if you could give an example of one where that was relatively straightforward and easy, and maybe one where it was not quite so much, just to kind of give people a sense of range of kind of, what this project and what this kind of initial stuff entails.
Sure. I'll give you two examples. The one was last year in around October, November. We were onboarding a customer for whom we had to use our crawlers, and we did not during that whole exercise we did not go through the homework where we would ask customer, or the customer would just look at the data and look at the fields that are being indexed, look at the meta tags that are being indexed, and they just relied on the default behavior of all the different components. They just relied on our default crawler and just assume that it's gonna grab everything, because every website is different. So we need to make sure that whatever system we use is catered to get the exact data that you want us to get. And 2 months into the onboarding, we figured out that there was no information in the description field. That is the field that is used to describe the page. And customers use that field to show content in the search results. And they were not seeing anything because there was no data in the description tags. So that was one example. And then the other example is from last week, where we were onboarding a customer, but we went through this exercise of just going through every single different types of pages, going through all the meta tags that are there in the pages, and then just figuring out what exactly is crawler gonna grab for you. During that exercise, customer realized that it's super easy to work with our crawlers. They can just add data in the meta fields, and then our crawler is just gonna grab that. And that's exactly what they did. Within a day, they added 9 more fields in the meta tags, and then the day after that, our crawler grabbed all of it and pushed it into their data. So within 2 days, we were able to just improve the quality of their data by a lot by just manipulating the meta tags. And all of this was because of the homework, where you just look at the page and see which field you want indexed. You figure out which data do you want in those fields. So this is why this exercise becomes so important, because you can just get done with the data ingestion part of it within a few days, rather than stretching it out over months or weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. Pete, you're on mute.
Really becomes really important for customers who, it's the about, expectation setting. Sometimes customers aren't prepared that they're going to need to have this additional data in their meta tag, and that's going to require development effort on their part. And it could be that now we're waiting for a development sprint or a development release, and now we're in a time zone or a time bucket, basically, where we're waiting to onboard now because customer has come to light that, I need to have additional fields deployed, and I got to deploy that. So all of that kind of bubbles up into homework and the initial stuff that you need to have. If you don't have those fields available, it's probably going to be a development effort on the customer's part to get those available.
Wow, so those are 2 great examples, and I hear your point there, Pete. It's critical, it's foundational. Maybe we can segue from that directly into sort of the data types themselves, right? So, and this is kind of a 2-part question that we can answer sort of together. I'll start with you, Karan, on this one. So what are the most common types of data that we see that we support, that we see often? And then what are sort of the different methods that we would use for each of those? You touched on sort of the crawler and and the APIs, but maybe we can go into that in detail, just that specific, like list out a little bit more comprehensive what we do there.
Right. So the most common type of data would be JSON objects. So you can create a JSON object and then use our API to send it to us. So the the content of that JSON object can be anything. If you can convert a PDF into a JSON object, then you can send it to us. If you can convert an Excel into a JSON object, then you can still use Ingest API. Or if you have a CSV, then that can be uploaded using our Ingest API. If you have an XML, even that can be uploaded. So basically, we can. Basically, Ingest API can work with a lot of different types of data objects. So as I mentioned, it can work with JSON, XML, CSV. Sometimes people just plug in directly into their pipeline that might be working on Python or Java, so it can ingest Python and Java objects as well, and .NET objects using the libraries that are available in those platforms. So it's super flexible. It can ingest any type of data. Whatever Solr can support, it can support that. As far as crawlers are concerned, crawlers can also help bring in data of type PDF, Excel, obviously a web page, and then on top of that, PDF, Excel, Word docs, PowerPoints, VSDX files. No one uses those, but our crawler can support that, as well as text files and rich text files. So you do have a lot of bandwidth, or you can ingest a lot of different type of data using our crawlers and ingest APIs. It's it's up to your imagination.
That's great. I appreciate it. Pete, anything to kind of add on as far as like the importance of that flexibility and just kind of the overall, the way the product was designed and, the intent behind it? Not hearing you right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really interesting is, it could be one of our differentiators is that we provide the native Solr. I mean, if Solr can do it, you can do it, and I think that's really the important piece. It's not like we're obfuscating the access to Solr through some native API that's proprietary to us, and you have to conform to our standards. For companies out there that are doing this by hand right now and doing it through Solr and just aren't getting a lot of the metrics and analytics and the speed in which you can make adjustments that Studio provides, most, I would, probably to some degree of certainty, most of whatever they're using for their ingestion APIs will work with our ingestion API. And so if they've already got that, process outlined, I think it's really easy to kind of move to Studio in that regard. That being said, I think it's also worth noticing that with great power comes great responsibility. You can bring your JSON objects and your JSON data in any format that you want, but if it's not more of a unified format where you have a common set of fields that the JSON objects are bringing in, then it's going to be an interesting indexing situation if you don't have some form and fashion of the data that you're bringing in. Because at the end of the day, Solr is a very flexible engine, and which makes Studio very flexible in that regard. So going back to some of that homework that we were talking about, really understanding that as you're uploading the documents, having a common form of the object that you're putting into Solr is important. So things like, hey, we're always going to have this description field that like Karan was talking about, right? We're always going to have a title field, but we need to have a URL field. Defining what the fields are that we're going to need to have for display purposes, especially within the results, is really crucial because we want to make sure that all the results have that same series of fields. So that's kind of, I would say, what I would add to that conversation is just understand that there's a lot of power here that you actually get with being able to use the native Solr APIs.
Awesome. As far as the methods themselves, then maybe we can start with you on this one as well, Pete. Then you know, what are some of the kind of pros and cons associated with different forms of data ingest? And you hit upon it in some way. You talked about this in, you were kind of hinting at it. And then with that great power comes great responsibility. I love that. I think the question then is, and we'll start with you, and then I'd like to go to Karan too, because what I'm trying to understand is like, when I'm a customer, is it pretty clear the decision? Do I need to make a decision when it comes to, different methods that I'm going to use for data ingest, or is it more, are there pros and cons, or is it just more like it's a pretty sort of one-to-one mapping? It's very clear that I should do this in this case and a different way in a different case.
I think in most cases, it's a great question. I think in most cases, it is going to be pretty cut and dry. I would say that like in most of our customer base, we are just dealing with crawlers, and so then we're just scraping a page and going on to the next link and scraping a page and going on to the next link. But we also provide modules depending on your content management system that you're using. So, as an example, we have a Sitecore connector that works with Sitecore and does things on more of a push mentality instead of what I would call a pull mentality. So, as an example, and not to go too deep on the technical side of Sitecore specifically, but like, Sitecore has functionality out of the box on how to manage Solr indexes. And so we tap into that by providing a native Solr index to Sitecore. That's really our studio index. And so as Sitecore indexes its own purposes, it's also indexing the studio one. So it's already creating that form and fashion and like, specific set of documents that we would expect to have to kind of work out when we're doing it with a crawler. We have the same thing on the Drupal side, where on the Drupal side, we have a module that can really more push content into our studio index instead of relying on more of that crawler based. But I would say largely, it is more crawler based, and, not just in studio. It's really important that on the cloud side, when you're running just normal Solr operations, there are various methods for pushing, especially like PDF content. There's other methods for being able to index and push content. And and I'll let Karan kind of talk this a little bit, but like a great example that we're seeing right now is a lot of customers out there are used to using the direct import handler in earlier versions of Solr, and the newer versions of Solr, they're stepping away from that for one reason or another. And so kind of talks to just different ways to get stuff in. Karan, what's going on with that direct import handler, by the way?
Yeah, so the community has just decided that they don't want to maintain that anymore. So what they have done is they have converted the data import handler from a core module into a contributed module. So you can still use it if you want to, but it's just that it's not maintained by the same community who's maintaining Solr. So it's maintained by another community now. I'm pretty sure there must be some overlap between the two, but it's not maintained by the main community anymore. So if you still want to use it, you have to assume the risks if there are any, and then use that. Otherwise, the Apache Solr community, they want people to use the ingest API, the update endpoint that's there in Solr. So they have worked a lot on making sure that the ingest API is versatile and it can handle any kind of data. Like I mentioned earlier, they want to make sure that you can ingest data from different sources. It can ingest data in different formats. So they have worked on making sure that that process becomes super easy and people can slowly start moving away from the data import handler. So that's what's going on in that way. So if you are using some a few-year-old method of connecting Solar and your data using data import handler, then you can still use it if you want to, but it would be better if you just spend some development effort and move to APIs.
Gotcha. That's really helpful, and thanks for the context, Pete, on that. I think then, I'm curious, not only, the context for the data import handler, then there's a couple questions I have here. Is I'd love to hear kind of an example of what you just described, Karan, like, where somebody made the decision to do that based on some of the older ingest methodology they were using. And then maybe even just an example or two of, Pete mentioned kind of like PDFs, and just kind of like elaborating on what he was just talking about related to kind of, in general, it's crawler based, and, there's obviously connectors, pros and cons. Just a little bit of context, to elaborate on some of the things he was saying, if you have any color there.
Sure. So the reason to move away from data import handler was mainly security, because the API, the ingest API, is super secure. It works on port 443. It has TLS 1.3 encryption. So it's a very secure way of ingesting data. Whereas data import handler, and in data import handler, there was all different kind of connectors like JDBC connecting to a database, connecting to an RSS feed, and so on. All of them worked well, but they were not really secure. So that's why the community decided to move away from all of those and just focus on ingest API. That's why in Studio, we just focus on ingest API. Even our web crawlers use ingest APIs. Our web crawler, we consume our own product where we use our web crawler to get the data, but then when pushing the data into Solar, we use same ingest APIs that are available for everyone to use who is on our product. And ingest APIs, as Pete has mentioned, it's super powerful. With great power comes great responsibility. You just have to then make sure that the data that you are sending is in line with all the other data that's there. Because you can send any data to it, but if you're sending data from multiple sources, you need to make sure that data is normalized into something that is uniform across all the sources that you're using. So data from one database and the second database needs to have similar fields, so that when you are creating a search experience, you can create a unified search experience, and you don't have two separate blobs of data sitting in there. So yeah, you can use ingest APIs to get the data from anywhere, and it's super secure. And you just need to make sure that your fields are proper and you're good to go.
Yeah, it really speaks to Jay. I know me and you had a conversation of talking about the difference between federated search versus unified search. And again, that kind of speaks to the whole idea around, this is a unified index that we're working with. And even though you might have federated tendencies where you've got search results coming from, 5 different external websites and different systems, we really are working with a unified index. And so having that really common data format and set of fields is really important. So kind of goes back to everything we've been talking about.
That's awesome. Do you have either one of you, maybe Karan, do you have another like maybe anecdote or example, real world example where again, somebody came and kind of discovered sort of what we could do for them in terms of making this a lot easier, and so maybe they were looking at a pretty big project and
yeah, actually it just happened 2 weeks ago, where we were talking to one of our customer and just trying to figure out how can we best use our crawlers to get the data. We were going through the same motion that we do with every customer, where we are just trying to make sure that we have access to all the pages, all the data is there, metadata is there. And a customer found that they don't really have a lot of good quality data available publicly. A lot of data that they have is in their database behind the scenes. And that customer was using AEM, Adobe. So a lot of data was in AEM. And when the engineers saw the ingest API, they immediately made the decision to just move to ingest API, and so that they have complete control over what data is sent to Studio, in which format, which field should have which data, and they did not want to rely on anything else. So they saw ingest API, and within a day or two, they completely moved away from crawlers and just went for ingest APIs. And then after a day or two of that, they had already implemented it. And within a week, they were live.
And I will say it was interesting because we were expecting that when they made the decision that they were going to walk away from using the crawlers and use the ingest API, we actually, at least for me, I thought that, okay, this means that they're probably going to come with a bunch of questions and we might have to, provide some enablement in that area. And they came back and said, yep, we're good. We already launched. Like we're set. Like we almost provided no assistance to them to be able to use those ingest APIs. And it really speaks to the fact that we are using the native language of Solr. If you're familiar with Solr, you're going to be familiar with their APIs. And so it was really neat to see that kind of light bulb click in, especially for a platform like AAM, where we don't currently have a large adoption rate yet of AAM. It's for us, it's a fairly new platform, and so being able to see how easy it was for a customer that's using AAM and using our Studio product and that partner having such a light bulb idea of, hey, this is easy, we were able to do it. It was magical to see. I'll say that.
I would imagine that's really a great anecdote there, and I would imagine that when we talk about sort of who gets involved with this process, you're talking about an Adobe, in particular, an Adobe deployment, and so I would imagine that maybe there's some potential complexity in terms of the project size, right? So can you guys just talk a little bit about like who gets involved in this process, like the whole data ingest process, and what's individual teams' roles, we also do a lot with implementation partners, obviously. So, what's their role? What's SearchStax's role? Typically, what are we seeing? That'll just help, the viewers and listeners to kind of get a sense for how that typically works. Maybe start with Pete.
Well, it starts with a dream, Jay. No, in terms of the players, I mean, it really depends on the maturity of who's leading the projects, and whether they're being driven by the customer, whether they're being driven by a partner. Going back to this example, and without trying to reveal too much, like this was an existing Studio an existing Studio customer on a different platform that wasn't AAM, and we had just onboarded them to Studio on their old platform, and we thought everybody was applauding and giving everybody a pat on the back because we had a successful onboarding and they were off to the races on their old platform, and within about a week later they came back to us and was like, so we're switching to AAM, we're completely rewriting all of our, like redoing everything, we're re-platforming, and we're only doing it in like a month. And we kind of looked at them like, okay, here we go. And again, we were trying to figure out, okay, what's the fastest way that we can do this? And so the players that were involved, I mean, obviously we had a really great partner that was working with that customer. We had a really great customer who had adopted our viewpoint and adopted our product and said, hey, this is a great product and we want to take it with us. Can we take it with us to another platform? So we had really great buy-in from the partner. We had a really great buy-in from the customer. And then on the platform side, we actually, even Adobe got involved and was a champion for us. And so having that really nice synergy between platform, the marketing team, and the technical team was really important for being able to have such a quick and successful launch, in my opinion. At least from me being, kind of an overseer of some of these things, it was really neat to see. Karan, from a technical side, you can probably get a little bit deeper on that, but like it was neat to see how all those players kind of, contributed here.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And by the way, a goal is a dream with a deadline. That's right. So what you're saying is not far off. And I guess Karan, yeah, it maybe, can you share a little bit additional context with us just about the actual sort of day-to-day operational sort of, how did it all go? And, again, without revealing anything important, but sensitive, but, the important aspects being more like, you know, again, from the perspective of what we've been talking about, what what were we able to avoid in terms of just kind of general additional friction and, kind of chaos and, unorganized kind of, aspects of the project by virtue of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, you know what? In all the onboardings I've been a part of, it all depends on how much involvement does the customer really want from us, because we most of the times, 99% of the times, we are never the blockers, because we don't really have any implementation. We don't do any, I mean, we just set up a crawler and then it's off to the races. We it's when setting up the environments, we just need a day and we can set up any number of environments that you want, and we are never really the blocker. So, and this was the case with this customer as well, where as Pete mentioned, there was really nice synergy between customer, implementation partner, and the platform. And immediately when they saw the ingest API, all of them knew that that was the way to go. There was no hurdle, no blocker from anyone. There was no objection from anyone, and everyone just got aligned to that ingest API. Everyone got hyper focused on that, and then within a few days, they just knocked it out of the park. We do get some customers where there sometimes might be a mismatch, or maybe they don't even have any technical expertise to make a call. So when that happens, then they rely on us to make those decisions. And if they don't really have technical expertise, then we often ask them to just go for crawlers, because then that's a completely hands-off approach. Only thing that they have to focus on is creating a website and putting content on their website. Everything else is taken care of by SearchStax, where our crawler goes and gets the data and then just helps them create a nice search experience. So, so basically, the level of involvement from us depends completely on the customer and the kind of handholding they want, kind of white glove treatment they want, and the level of technical expertise they have. I remember we had a customer who was looking. We had a trial. I think someone spun up a trial, and we reached out to them and asked them, how are you going to use Solar? Do you need any help? And they were like, nope, I already know how to do dense vector search, and I'll just use Solar. And without any help from us, they implemented semantic search on Solar. We do get customers like that who are highly technical. We have some customers who have played around with learning to rank without any involvement from us, and they have like 2 or 3 Solar engineers on their staff. So, so our involvement completely depends on the technical expertise that customers have. We can be as hands-on as you want, as hands-off as you want us to be.
That's awesome. Any parting, this has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate both of you. Any parting words just to kind of help people, align to, okay, now I understand the basics. This is, by the way, we're going to have more of this type of content getting into some of those connectors that Pete talked about and some other things. But any other kind of parting comments from either of you? Karan, we'll start with you.
My parting comment is going to be that data ingestion is hard and it's daunting. I'll just say that, don't worry. It's hard for everyone. We'll talk about it. We'll figure it out.
Awesome.
Don't worry.
I think that really plays into my parting thoughts is, really it's about expectation management. and knowing that, you know, there's probably going to be some work on your side that's going to be needed. And obviously, and that's not just on the ingestion side. We're only talking about ingestion here, right? But even on the implementation side, you know, you're going to have, the customers are going to have some work to do to implement, you know, Studio and get it to look like they want it to on their site and stuff like that. And so knowing ahead of time and kind of being aware, you know, what the expectations are, and just setting those proper expectations that, you know, it is hard. Data ingestion is hard. It can have some homework. You're going to have to understand your content. And if you don't have a grasp on it, and especially for digital, you know, for new digital marketers who maybe are new to their company and they're having to understand their site, you know, have some, you know, make sure we've got folks on the call and during our onboarding process who understands the content, because that's going to help us help you much easier.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. This was really terrific. I'm looking forward to more of these sessions.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
All right. Take care.